Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Grow Pakistan. Today we have a very special guest with us. His name is Adil Mansoor and he's a well-known expert in Pakistan's agricultural sector. He's been working in agriculture research for 7 years and he's an analyst at Business Recorder. Welcome to the show, Adil.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
I'm well.
Okay, so the purpose of today's conversation is to discuss the wheat crisis that we underwent in 23-24 and discuss why it came about, what happened and how this plays out for the next year. So just to start off, what do you think led to the government's decision to import wheat during the season which has just passed, despite a domestic surplus?
Okay, so the definition of a surplus is dependent on the price, the market prices, right? The market prices have doubled over the last 3-4 years. It went from 40 rupees per kg to almost 120, 150 rupees per kg in a wholesale market. What we forget is that although we have these static forecasts of what our consumption or what our demand might be, the demand fluctuates with the prices. When the prices increase dramatically in a very short span of time, the demand also suffers. The second reason for why we define it as a surplus now in hindsight, not at that time, is because the smuggling to Afghanistan had stopped. The smuggling to Afghanistan had stopped because the rupee became stable circa August, September 2023, right? Once you took away the currency arbitrage, once that arbitrage disappeared, the incentive for smuggling disappeared, and once smuggling disappeared, your demand for Afghanistan also lowered your local demand. Pakistan has been importing wheat at least since 2020, and that import has been duty free for the last 4 years. Why? Because our production has been circling between 25 to 27 million metric tons, and as we found, because of currency pressures, there was demand emanating from Afghanistan also, and we felt or assumed that our domestic demand in any given year is close to 30 million metric tons. So we have a deficit approximately of 3 million metric tons. Pakistan has been importing circa 3.5 million metric tons every year. So the decision to import a certain quantity this year was not very different from what has been happening for the last 3-4 years. Yes, that decision is not market driven. It's based on a very high level approval from the Economic Coordination Committee of the federal government. Yes, that decision in September, August was not taken by an elected government, it was taken by an interim government, but it was not a deviation from what was happening for the last 3-4 years. It turned into a surplus. Why? Because we had very good weather conditions. But again, that's in hindsight. We found that out only in March, April 2024 that our crop yields were doing well. 2, the demand for smuggling to Afghanistan also disappeared. Again, that's in hindsight. Nobody knew in August when the rupee had touched 315, 320 in the open market, and everybody was saying that there's 3 different market rates for the currency itself. Nobody knew at that time that Afghanistan, the demand for smuggling to Afghanistan would disappear the way it did overnight.
Right. So that's very interesting. And you pointed out static estimates. You pointed out Afghanistan smuggling issue with the rupee. And then you also talked about the government not knowing what production would be like in hindsight, whether that was the weather estimates or the currency related issues.
Yeah.
So a question I have, and I guess a lot of viewers also have, is when we're March to May, we're in the harvest season.
Yeah.
Why is the import allowed during that time? Like, is it not clear enough by March what the crop condition is looking like? And if there is sort of a 3.5 million shortage, should it not have been this decision made before the harvest season was upon us? Because then what happens to our harvest, right? Like, how does that play out?
Absolutely, and that's where things went wrong. So what could have been done differently, right? That should be the question. We have to understand that all policy making choices have adverse consequences. Policymakers should make choices that minimize those or take the least the path with least trade-offs involved, right? But number 3, and which is the most important, is that the regulatory functions should have oversight and supervision such that if you see adverse consequences emanate, your policy making and decision making should be agile and dynamic and should be able to alter paths. If you see what went wrong, what went wrong is by December, somewhere somebody should have been able to flag that, you know what, Pakistan is importing wheat at a much lower price from the international market than the price it has announced for the upcoming crop in May. We altered.
So now we feel like no one is getting above 3,000 rupees per mound when the support price was 1,000 rupees higher, right?
Yeah.
4,000 or 3,900 in Sindh and Punjab.
Yes.
So in this sort of a scenario, do you think that farmers are able to meet their cost of production still because input prices of say fertilizer or diesel have risen, right?
Yeah.
And are they with say the market rate of 2,700 or those that are getting 2,800, even if it's touching close to 3,000? Is there parity between the cost of production of growing wheat and the rate that they're now getting in the open market since the government is not procuring?
Okay, so it might be a little technical to unpack this, but let's try to break this down like this. The number of victims of what happened in the wheat procurement season is high, because the sheer number of small farmers who are also less efficient, less productive is high. But the quantum of wheat which is selling at lower than its cost is probably not that much. Why? Because the efficient farmers, the more productive ones, the larger, the medium size, actually have a lower cost, significantly lower cost. The number of those farmers is low, but their actual quantum is significantly higher. So not all farmers have suffered and not everyone has made losses. B, remember, farming is as much a business as any other. All businesses have good years, all businesses have bad years. 2022, 2023 were amazing year for farmers, especially who did not get wiped out by floods. 2024, not so much. So that cyclicality is built in the business, even more so in a higher risk business like agriculture and farming, right? However, those small farmers will now suffer. Their predicament is less about profitability and more about cash flow. Why? Because profitability is something that you can make do with from season to season, but if you do not have cash flow, if you're unable to offload your commodity or your output altogether and you're just sitting on inventory, you don't have liquidity, you don't have cash to now go into the market, buy inputs for the next season, plant and try to make up for those losses. That is the number one danger that we are facing. And number two, we have not thought about anything what happens if these farmers once again suffer in the Kharif season right now. If say these floods get out of hand, the situation dramatically turns into something severe, or for example the prices of the Kharif commodities, the corn, the rice, the cotton, they also fall in rupee terms, because you know what, currency has been stable for the last 1 year. We no longer have depreciation coming in and saving our farmers because of the parity between international prices and local prices. So what do? Those are our problems, not so much in what happened, because what happened has happened. It is absolutely the failure of Punjab government, it's absolutely the failure of interim government to not be agile, but more importantly, and I think this is something I missed right now in mentioning, the fault lies absolutely and completely with the Punjab government for misleading the farmers, for insisting that it will procure, at the price announced at 4,000, for insisting that, you know what, if you register yourself through the mobile app, the procurement department will definitely come to you and procure from you. For misleading everyone until on TV channels, on media, in the newspapers, until the last day when all of a sudden they announce, you know what, we have ample wheat from last year, maybe we should not be procuring. Now is the time to talk about, okay, this has happened, what do we do next?
What next? Yeah. So in terms of what next, I think one question that stands out is there was a video going viral on social media where the wheat in the government godams or whatever they had stocked was unfit for human consumption, right? There was fungus in it. So this begs a few questions. How did we allow fungi infested wheat to come in? Was there no quality control in place? And why were key officials not held accountable in the initial inquiry in the wheat import scandal? Is it just we're going to keep making committees and having inquiries but no action is going to be taken, or is there actually going to be a change?
So we'll be addressing two different issues. One is the question mark over the safety of the imported wheat, and the other is the unsafe and damaged wheat inventory in the government godowns.
And then the accountability.
Yeah, the government godowns have had infested and infected wheat grains for years and years. The story goes back. You pick up any wheat crisis from 2008, from 2000, from mid-90s, from earlier years, every time you'll hear about, you know what, government godowns are not so good. Half of the wheat, 20% of the wheat, 30% of the wheat in Sindh and Punjab gets damaged. There are no mechanisms in place. And the truth is, even government silos are not really silos the way we think of silos, the way we imagine silos. In many of the places, government wheat is also stored under open skies.
Tarpals and all.
Yes, tarpal. So is that really any way of storing wheat? No, it's not. The policy has been in place for one reason only, to make sure that farmers as a political constituency remain happy. There's a wealth transfer from the consumers to the farming community. That's why the policy has been in place. It has not been in place to safeguard consumers. The function of the wheat procurement policy is to make sure, has been in the past, to make sure that farmers get a good price. It's not to safeguard you and me as consumers. As consumers, yes, the government has another function, which is to subsidize the end user retail price, either to utility store corporations or the rate at which they release the wheat to flour mills. That is all now also a thing of the past. Why? Because that's another story. We have a commodity operations debt. It has reached 1.5 trillion rupees in its size. And yes, the government has, for the last 3, 4, 5 years, and people like myself, including, have been talking about the government needs to exit this procurement function, because this whole government storage is not working out. The wheat gets wasted. There's a lot. It's as dysfunctional as the discos and the whole electricity value chain that we have. There's too many line losses, so to speak, right? So yes, everybody's been talking about it. Everybody's been saying, all the researchers, Sohail Malik, so many have been talking about governments need to exit this in a phased manner, not overnight over Shahzeb Khanzada's program. Don't do that. You were supposed to do it over a number of years. You were supposed to lay out, you know what, we procure 5 million metric tons. Right now, we'll come down to 3 million metric tons. We used to pay you a higher than market price. We will now pay you equivalent to market price. We'll pay you a little bit less than market price, and let them be conditioned into, you know what, we don't no longer want to sell to the government. We no longer are waiting and not selling our produce to the private sector. We're no longer waiting for the government to come in and buy, and then that will allow the private sector, which is functional. Yes, it is not very formal. It does not function as corporates, but is very, very deeply functional in all other crops which are grown by the same farmers: cotton, corn, rice, sesame. If the private sector, the arthis, whoever they are, yes, they might be informal. Yes, they might sometimes take advantage of the growers. Yes, there are other issues. Yes, there is tax evasion, but it is functional. Why can it not be functional?
So Adil, you mentioned that Kharif season going well is really important for the farmers to have cash liquidity, so that we look into the next wheat planting season that's going to come about in October, November, December. So what crops are you anticipating will do well in the Kharif season, and do you see that liquidity being there as the planting for next season for wheat starts?
So I think all hopes right now are pinned on rice doing well, which does not look very good itself either. Why? Because cotton has already been suffering for the last 18 months at least, ever since, again, the international prices came down, the energy tariffs for the textile industry were revised, the demand dynamics shifted, the floods happened, the cotton crop did really well in the following season, which was 2023 Kharif, but the farmer did not get a good price because the international price had collapsed by that time, right? So cotton area, I cannot speak for certainty, but there is expectation that the cotton area might decline compared to last year by as much as 25%. That's a very significant number.
Yeah, it's quite likely, yeah.
And we're already witnessing its results in the cotton arrivals at the ginning factories.
PCGA report that came
PCGA,
50% from last year at this time.
Yeah. Absolutely, which was reported by Dawn as well, right? So that's your number one fear. Cotton is out. Cotton farmer is not going to do so well. International dynamics of cotton pricing do not look very favorable. So cotton's out. Corn has been doing very poorly for the last 2 to 2.5 years now, ever since we had that GMO problem with poultry. Although corn itself was not in the doldrums, it was soybean import. But once you take out the protein from the poultry feed, poultry demand itself suffers. And when poultry demand suffers, corn being the carbohydrate, the source of energy for the poultry and animal feed, the demand for corn also suffered. So the corn itself again was not doing well locally, but corn had some safety net in the form of exports to China.
Right.
Again, your currency became stable. International prices, the commodity super cycle stabilized, plateaued. The prices started falling down. International market, which is generally good for economies, but when your economy is cyclical and your exports are opportunistic, which means that your exports are dependent upon international market pricing spiraling upwards exceptionally in a very short period of time, or spiraling downwards in a very short period of time. When your economy behaves in an opportunistic manner, then the consequences are that the moment those prices collapse, your demand for export has also now plateaued or probably disappeared, as we will now see in the coming season, I think.
Okay. And for sesame, it's been a hot topic recently.
Sesame has done quietly and sneakily really well, all thanks to China. There's been demand for sesame export to China. But I think most importantly, and I just wanted to finish this, rice will be the key determinant in the liquidity situation for farmer. Why? Because rice has done amazingly well because of, again, another exogenous factor, which was the ban by India on its export, because India was going into an election season in 2024. Now, when India banned its export, all of a sudden rice, which was otherwise was stable in the international market, suddenly spiraled upwards. Pakistan opportunistically took a lot of benefit from it. Rice farmers also did tremendously well, but now the rice pricing might fall if India removes that ban, because now the Modi government is out of the election season. That's number one. The final key decision on that will come by November, which might be already too late for farmers, right? Because the farmers have already planted, invested, and harvested that rice. B, the higher taxation on export industries, which because the income tax on the rice exporter has grown from 1% of top line to 30% of bottom line. So when the income tax changes, rice export profitability dynamics might also change, which in turn might affect the profitability of farmers. Now, if you take out rice also, then I think our wheat farmer by October, November will be in deep trouble. If any of those crops do well, all of a sudden, things could change.
I mean, there's different sorts of other offices operating over there.
Absolutely.
And now that we're on this topic, I just want to take a step back and see, you mentioned, that like the currency and this market, like it can't really fare like this. It can't continue. It's not sustainable.
Yeah.
So I just want you to talk about a few things, or just ask you, like, what's the duality in our agricultural space? Like, what's the hypocrisy that we sort of deal with? हम कहते कुछ हैं और होता कुछ है. The government states one thing and in reality it's something else, like you were talking about the under-reporting. And can you define the term khanche and how it applies in the wheat sector? Because I've heard that like the caretaker government was not allowed to take that decision, but it was taken, right? And a lot of people on social media or on YouTube forums will say that, there was embedded corruption within the ranks, and that's what you might, at least in Karachi lingo, define a khancha. But how would you sort of explain that in how that plays out in agriculture, given it's not that formal? So for the viewers who might not know how the sector actually operates, I'm just trying to provide some context in terms of how these things work on the ground.
So to your first question, and this is my personal belief, not many people agree with me, the duality in agriculture is that we have demonized this person called the Arthi, the middleman, who for the last, I don't know, many centuries have been performing a function that the private sector, the formal private sector, your corporates, your investors have been refusing to. Your commercial banks, your central bank refuse to support your agriculture sector. Even the subsidies, the credit programs that are mandated by the government, by the federal government to be provided, the credit that needs to be provided under mandated programs has been falling, is now 1/20th the allocation what it was in 2000 in nominal rupee terms. The subsidized credit that is set aside by the under mandatory programs. So when you don't supply somebody with credit, when you don't provide them with liquidity, when you don't provide them with markets, you can't demonize this character called Arthi, who provides him with liquidity, who provides him with cash flow, who provides him with guaranteed purchase, which the government is no longer even being able to provide that in the case of wheat, right? There was this one thing that the government was doing right from the farmer's lens, which was the government was continuing to procure wheat and the price was supposed to be guaranteed. The government has taken away that also. The Arthi is not going anywhere. That investor, that informal investor who does not pay taxes, who is not registered, who has no NTN, who is completely a ghost, but is there for the farmer. So until you provide, and by the way, these private sector players have been provided with everything under the sun to go, every possible enabling incentive to go into the agricultural market and replace this farmer. Under the PTI government and the Raza Bakr regime, Nemat collateral came up. The private sector was allowed duty-free import and subsidized credit, both at the same time. Duty-free import of plant and machinery to build silos, infrastructure for storage of crops. It was allowed subsidized credit to import, just like other schemes. The government cannot, and probably tax breaks also. The government cannot possibly go further than that in doing hand holding for private sector, which is already, by the way, very established, has its own liquidity and cash and it's sitting on idle cash to invest. It's been complained that it has no investment opportunities in Pakistan. The government is providing you a cheap credit, the government is providing you with tax breaks, the government is providing you with duty-free import of plant and machinery. You still fail to set up silos.
I mean, I feel like Nemat Collateral has set up few silos. They're doing maize and rice, and they've done about 5 Arab rupees last year.
The idea of collateral mechanism has been around for 7 years, man.
Certainly, I agree that the progress is slow.
It's not.
Right. Okay, and last couple of questions. How can the government improve transparency and accountability in the wheat procurement process and storage process that we mentioned to prevent corruption and inefficiencies, especially if it's trying to phase out its involvement in the sector? As we pointed out in our discussion, you can't immediately exit the market, right, given its heavy involvement over the decades. So how does it sort of phase out its involvement in a way that's beneficial to wheat and our national security concern, food security concerns?
Okay, so the cardinal rule of government intervention is the best time to exit is when international market prices collapse. And the international market prices collapse, international demand and supply situation is in equilibrium, you have the luxury of exiting the intervention. Why? Because even if your local weather or local dynamics take a turn for the worse, your crop does not do so well locally, the international market is doing well, the prices are low, and you will have the luxury of importing the deficit in time from the international market. The cardinal rule also is that the best time to exit was 2014 to 15.
Well, we're 10.
Why?
10
because your currency was pegged, again, flawed, not flawed. You had more than ample time to exit the market. Let international market prices were lower in rupee terms also, which means that Pakistani farmer was uncompetitive, which means that even if you had deficits, international market would have made up for that deficit. Now the currency is no longer stable. You cannot have a very long-term outlook on the currency. But again, this is the best time. Your currency is stable. If we do not foresee a significant depreciation in the coming year, the best time to exit is now. We have already partially exited so far as Punjab is concerned. Only the federal and Sindh remains. But lay out the plan, announce it well in advance. So there are market players, investors who are willing to take the contrarian bet, which is that, you know what if the wheat does not do so well, the government is no longer going to procure, local market prices are going to run high. How about I import some wheat from the international market right now when the prices are still low? And have that, and there will be contrarian players. There are always contrarian players in commodity markets. So lay out well in advance so that different market participants can take different positions on the commodity.
Well, thank you, Adil, for your insights. I hope people in the government, in PASCO and other related departments listen to this and take some initiative from the conversations that you've had, because we're standing at a very delicate point as it comes to our commodity markets, especially wheat, given its importance as a staple crop for Pakistan. So that being said, we would like to thank Adil Mansoor from Business Recorder for his really valuable insights into the wheat sector and generally how agriculture plays out in Pakistan. बहुत सारे लोगों को पता है कि एग्रीकल्चर हमारा सबसे बड़ा सेक्टर है, लेकिन उनको उसकी अहमियत और जिस तरह से वो चलता है, ऑपरेट करता है, उसका नहीं अंदाज़ा होता. तो आज आदिल भाई के साथ हमें ये सारी चीज़ें अनपैक और अनकवर करने का मौका मिला है. हम इनके बहुत बहुत शुक्रगुजार हैं.